No, I don't need it. Yeah. Okay.
Mr. Corrêa de Lago, hi, this is Sona. It's 11, it's time to begin. Are we ready? Mr. Corrêa de Lago, are we ready?
Yes. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Good to
Such
see
a
you.
bright, lovely morning today, yes. Very
Higher volume, please. Can you go higher volume? Yeah. 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 Good.
So Geeta is here and we have more than 20 colleges across the country who've joined us today. We're really thrilled and excited about it. So if we have a go ahead from your end, we'll begin the session.
Yes.
Perfect. Hello, everyone. It's really a great pleasure for us at ASET to host more than 20 colleges, students across NASA zonals at Purnima University, and many more architects and students from across the country. I'm Sona Mambe, the course and content developer at ASET, and together with our team, we welcome you all. To think that we are literally connected by just, jumping beams of light, emitting binary codes from different parts of the country. We have colleges from Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, Chennai, Coimbatore, Lucknow, Jaipur, Gwalior, Bhopal, Kolkata, and even colleges from Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. With the Brazilian ambassador, Mr. Corrêa de Lago, joining us from Delhi. This is nothing but the magic of internet. Internet makes experts and ideas accessible and literally reduces distances to bring people together. Today's session will begin with an introduction to the ambassador by Geeta Balakrishnan, the founder and curator of Ethos and Message, after which Mr. Corrêa de Lago will dazzle us with his talk. This will be followed by a moderated Q&A. All participants will be on mute during the lecture to ensure that the recording runs without disturbances. Hence, we would request the participants to type in their questions in the chat box like we discussed yesterday and before that, so that we can seamlessly moderate all your questions towards the end of the session. The session will close with a vote of thanks. And so without much ado, I hand over the mic to Geeta. Over to you.
Thanks, Sona. They say that magic happens when you're in the right place at the right time. And I was witness to that when I was in Delhi for a conference. And I heard André speak. And I was delighted when he agreed to spread the magic. And so here we are today, hosting the Brazilian ambassador to India, André Corrêa de Lago, for his talk. Sense and Sensibility, SNS, is a lecture series by ASET to give institutions access to expert viewpoints from across the globe. These experts would demonstrate multiple advantages of developing and exploring design through their choices, experiments, and lessons. And Mr. Corrêa de Lago, Pritzker jury member and the ambassador of Brazil to India, is the perfect speaker to inspire young minds of our country. André is the ambassador of Brazil to India and has served at the Brazilian embassies in Japan, Madrid, Prague, Washington, D.C., Buenos Aires, and at the missions to the European Union in Brussels. The ambassador is a recognized architectural critic and is also a distinguished author of several articles and books, including on the works of Oscar Niemeyer, Claudio Bernardes, and Paulo Jacobson, and on Brazilian modern architecture as well. He was the curator of the Brazilian Pavilion at the Venice Biennale of Architecture in 2014 and is the jury of the architecture's most prestigious award, the Pritzker Architecture Prize. And we in India are proud that we brought home the award this year through architect Balakrishnan Doshi. André is a thorough thinker and an inspiration. Today, he will be presenting works of Pritzker Prize winners from India, Japan, and Brazil by showcasing selected works of Doshi, Tange, Maki, Isozaki, Ando, Ito, Ban, and Sana, Niemeyer, and Mendes da Roca. He expects to shed some light on the many forms that good architecture can take. I now request the ambassador to begin his presentation. Over to you, André.
Thank you. Thank you for the generous introduction, Geeta, and I'm very, very happy to participate in this exercise. I'm very happy to see that there is a strong public and to know that online I can be followed by many others. So it's a great challenge for me, and I'm very excited. So we can talk a lot about architecture, obviously, and what I'm trying to concentrate on this presentation is on how diverse quality can be, how different architectures can be recognized, and how the different architectures can be considered extremely good and can be an example for everybody to study. So I concentrated on three countries: India, obviously, because I'm ambassador to India; Japan, because I was ambassador to Japan the last 5 years before I came to India; and obviously Brazil, because we are very proud of our modernist architecture. So I will start. I will try to have a very balanced presentation, because I have the same number of images basically for each one of the architects. And I will start with Doshi, because we are in India, and because he's an absolutely wonderful man and the first Indian to receive the prize. So I can, yeah. Yeah. So just a second. So the title, I concentrate that have already the prize in the jury for years. And I was in the group Doshi, choose this year. And I have made a celebrity. I reflect this variety of quality, and also some comments on each of them. So Doshi, born in 27, received the Pritzker Prize last year. And Doshi, as some of you know, was a member of the jury some years ago, as Charles Corrêa was a member of the jury also some years ago. So what is the extraordinary characteristic of Doshi is the beginning of his career. He worked with Le Corbusier in the 50s, and he acted very much in Chandigarh with Le Corbusier, and he learned amazingly well this extraordinary architecture that was at the time by far the most influential architecture in the world. So he adapted this very up-to-date and then contemporary architecture to the new India, and in Ahmedabad. He built very modernist building, like in 1962. He finished this extraordinary building, which full of architecture in Ahmedabad. Is probably one of the staircases of the 20th century. And it's in that school of architecture, not only he built a wonderful building, has been a very strong and influential educator in his country. This is the building seen from outside in the campus, and I urge everyone who goes to Ahmedabad to go and visit the campus, and we'll have a light on. These buildings show buildings to integrate the precepts of modern architecture in India. And you have the two big influences. The first is Corbusier, as I said, which he learned a lot and worked. Also of Louis Kahn. Louis Kahn is one of the most important American architects who died quite young, in fact, in his 60s, but was extraordinarily influential in the 50s and the 60s. And Doshi invited him to work in India. And he came to India in the 60s. And so Doshi also incorporates many of the lessons of Louis Kahn. But the most interesting contribution of his is that he made extremely Indian focus on what needs to be done in architecture. had a very strong social since all the time, since the beginning, and he the pioneer incremental architecture, which have a very strong basic project, but you have planned since the beginning that the persons that are going to live in these buildings and in that neighborhood are going to make their own interventions. So in this Aranha low-cost housing of '89, he won the Aga Khan Prize, which is an extraordinarily important prize, and this has contributed enormously for the world to know that concept. But he had started that earlier in the building dignified buildings that took into consideration the traditions and the conditions and the preferences of those who live in this area. So this concept that today is more or less accepted a bit everywhere, in fact, was pioneered by Doshi. But at the same time that he had this kind of focus, he has an extremely refined architecture. This is the case of the Indian Institute of Management in Bangalore in the 70s, which is an extraordinary building where the climate and the vegetation and the creation of spaces where the students can meet and where the students can be inspired has been extremely successful. And when you visit it today, it has evolved in a fabulous way, and it shows that Doshi could both have a kind of very strong and elite institution, and at the same time have very good low-cost housing. And he's also a very original architect. He started to do things that nobody else except him can do. And for instance, in this building, which is a building without facade, you arrive and you're directly seeing the roof of the building in 1994. This building is an extraordinary structure that was built with local talent, and this is being now, this is when the building was finished, but now it's completely painted by Hussein. It's a major example of perfect integration of architecture and of art. So this refinement of Doshi has also been confirmed in his own office in Ahmedabad from the 1980s, because he has extremely agreeable context for working with a perfect integration. Is also a symbol of his architecture, as well as his own house. This is the annex to his own house in the 80s. That also shows how careful he is on issues like light and materials. Now I'm going to move to Japan, and we're going to see the Japanese and the Japanese architects. I'm going to start with Kenzo Tange. As you will see, I will not follow the year in which the architects have won the Pritzker. I will follow a bit the period in which they were really influential. So Kenzo Tange was the first one. He won in 1987. And Kenzo Tange is the pioneer of modern architecture in Japan. This is a building of 58, prefectural building in Kagawa. And you can see how clear, how honest the structure is demonstrated. Concrete, very much concrete, and somehow what has also propelled his career is the fact that Japan wanted a new image in the world after the World War. The country was destroyed, and the country wanted to show a new image of looking forward and not looking at the past, where they were associated with war and all these things. So this new image of Japan, as you can see here, 1960s, the town hall. You see all the traditional constructions, and then you have this very strong brutalist building. But at the same time, the brutalist building reflects the traditional structures, Japanese architecture, traditional architecture. Kenzo Tange is also famous for his giant projects of urbanism. This is a plan for Tokyo in 1960 that had a very strong international impact, in which he expanded the city on in the Bay of Tokyo. He is also for his integration of art. This is a case in the cultural center in 1963. So he was having a very, very strong career with very much international recognition. But the great moment of his career was the Olympic Arena in 1964, and which became somehow the strongest symbol of the reconstruction of Japan. The structure of these buildings is simply amazing, and it showed at the same time originality, engineering capacity, and a lack of fear of going ahead, of seeing the future that Japan was having at the time. In the same year, he built the beautiful cathedral in Tokyo, and also a little after, he built this extremely original building in Tokyo that integrated at the same time all these roads that you have in Tokyo, and a very contemporary building methods. So Kenzo Tange was a very objective architect. Finally, in 1970, his efforts in all the intellectual movement in Japan at the time to try to think a completely new architecture was reflected in the Expo in Osaka in 1970. And this is the main building, the project of the main building. And it was a highly successful moment of Japanese architecture. And finally, between 64 and 70, the complete change of the image of Japan in the world was in great part due to architecture. Fumihiko Maki, who worked with Tange and studied in the United States, got the prize in 1993. Fumihiko Maki is the next stage of Japanese architecture. As you can see there, 1978, an extremely refined architecture with less references, direct references to traditional Japanese structures, but most of all, an architecture of international influence. It was not anymore Japanese architecture, it was much more an international architecture that was appearing in Japan. The spiral building of 85 is probably his most famous building, because in the middle of Tokyo, he built this, one of the symbols of postmodernism, a building that somehow reflected what was happening inside. It's a multifunction building, and gave a dynamic to the facade that was absolutely unusual for the modernist ideals. And this was really one of the symbols of postmodernism. And this made Fumihiko Maki particularly famous. But he was at the same time the man of refinement, the refinement with light, the refinement of details. As you know, construction of buildings in Japan has extraordinary quality. And he is, like in this case, as you can see, the Kyoto Museum of Modern Art of 86, is an extremely good example of that elegance in light and the refinement in the space. Then we can interpret it in many ways. This is 1989, it's a stadium. Some people see here an influence of popular culture of Japan, but also of old instruments of the samurais. Anyway, the fact is that he incorporated all these elements, even with so much imagination, even humor and excitement to architecture, that was also very well received, and showing that the stadium, that is a building that really has to call the attention, he was capable of doing also a very special architecture for that. This is a crematorium from 1997. That definitely shows move alongside. This one is a space of meditation where you are confronted with death and with difficult. Recent 15 probably elegant of the things right of the Pritzker in this forward 2015.
Sorry, everyone, we're having some trouble with the thick walls in the embassy. We seem to have lost connection. We've gotten in touch with the ambassador, and he will join us shortly. We understand that there was also some audio problems. We will figure that out in a while. Hello, ambassador.
Hi, how are you?
In a good place. How is the internet now? We'll have to begin the sharing again. Neeti?
Yes, please.
Which?
And we lost you when you began with the crematorium part. So if you could repeat
Okay.
that, will be nice.
So I'll go back to the crematorium.
Yes.
Is it all right?
Yes.
So the crematorium shows the very his capacity to have his architecture adapted to completely different circumstances. You saw a stadium that is something that is related to movement, is related to life, and here you see an architecture that reflects perfectly what it shows, which is a place of meditation, a place in which you are confronted with the very difficult moments and at the same time extremely elegant and with an amazing light. And it doesn't move. Then, yeah. So I'm sorry, just a second, I'm going to move to the next, that's it. So very recently, in 2015, Fumiko Maki built probably the most epic that was built in the World Trade Center. It's a building called 4 World Trade Center. And in this extremely simple building, he is at the same time giving to the public a very elegant, almost sculpture, gigantic sculpture, and at the same time a very respectful, elegance to substitute buildings that we know were destroyed in a very complex way. Oops. Yeah. Let me show you. Then I come to India because recently Fumiko Maki built the beautiful Bihar Museum in Patna. And this is the entrance hall with this beautiful staircase in wood. Fumiko Maki was extremely satisfied with this project. This is a museum that was inaugurated last year. It is a demonstration of his complete capacity to adapt to different sites and to different materials. And I want to touch very quickly on the fact that he was an extremely influential architect also regarding small urban interventions. This is a complex it's been since 1969 until 19. And the fact is that he wanted to respect the scale of the neighborhood. And so instead of doing something that would be like one building and everybody feels that it's just one building, he broke down in many different buildings with different characteristics. It's one of the most delightful modern streets in the 20th century. And finally, just an image of his project to Amravati. His entry in 2017 was the winning project. But the project was dropped, but this is his project, his winning project. So, Isozaki got the prize only this year, but born in 31, Isozaki was mostly influential in the 70s and 80s. In fact, he started early because also like the projects of Tange, with this very famous City in the Air project of 1960, The experimentation at the time in Japan, everything was possible. It was a technological society looking ahead. So he was quite influential since he was young because of these very daring projects that you can see structurally. They are extremely interesting, although very bold. In the following years, he demonstrated to be a splendid brutalist architect, like in this case of this library in Oita. But he deviated from the brutalism tendency, and already in '74, he started to build structures that were extremely original and that were also some of the most influential buildings in the postmodern period. So in the 1970s, this is a museum in Gunma. This is a library in Fukuoka, also from 1974. And finally, Isozaki in 83, I'm sorry, had this amazing project that was built, although this is the conceptual drawing, but very beautiful drawing, the Tsukuba Center, which is one of the 10 or 5 most iconic images of postmodernism, in which he incorporates from Michelangelo to Japanese elements, and he creates a space that is definitely a new step in architecture. But he also built a lot, not only in Japan, but in the world. This is the main stadium for the Olympics in Barcelona. This is a very important convention hall in Nara in Japan in 2008. And this is an amazing convention center in Qatar in 2011. And this is an inflatable building. It's a concert hall that he designed with Danish Kapoor in 2013 that has been to many places in Japan, mostly in areas where there were natural disasters. This is one of the elements that impresses more about Isozaki, is that he was in the 80s the most influential architect probably in the world, and he identified many Western architects that owe to him to have been able to build and to have been able to be recognized. So somehow the shift, Isozaki represents the shift of the center of contemporary architecture to Japan and to Asia. And this, I think, is something that cannot be underrated. On the opposite, it's quite extraordinary. And he continues to be extremely active until now. This is the Allianz Tower in Milan in 2014, a stunning tower that defines the modern area of Milan and shows his complete control that not only of his postmodern phase, but also of a very sophisticated high-tech that he also continues to apply in his architecture. Tadao Ando, who got the prize in 1995, is probably one of the most influential architects today in the world, still extremely active. But he started very modest in the 70s with very small houses in Osaka, the city where he grew up and where he lives until today, in which he did an extraordinary exercise of the very small, the enormous limitation of square meters that you have in pieces of land, urban pieces of land in Japan. He succeeded to create spaces that are extremely attractive and quite mysterious. The fact is that Tadao Ando is the architecture of individualism. You recognize Tadao Ando building very quickly. As you can see here from 82, a house in Japan, in Tokyo, where he uses this geometry that seems like a very basic geometry, but in fact it's a highly sophisticated use of squares and circles, etc. And this arrived at the moment in which the world was very much open to this new kind of experiment. So he was very strong modernist, not at all a postmodernist, but he was offering a variety of new extreme concrete and a very, very personal style. This building in Kobe, T1, in which you see that even if the apartments are very small in this building, they have a very beautiful view. When you walk around the building, you can feel a difference. Which one? The one before? Yeah. So, no. Now? Yeah, okay. This is a house from the early 80s in Tokyo, in which you can see his very bold and elegant use of geometry at a moment in which most of the other architects were doing postmodernism. Tadao Ando came with a radical modernism, very concentrated on the opportunity geometry. What obviously is one of the symbols of minimalism, and also, as you can see, he has very strong personal style. You recognize a building by Tadao Ando. These are the common areas in an apartment building in Kobe from 1981. Here, the Church of Light in Osaka from 1988. That is probably the minimalist building that will be remembered for many, many years. In which there is nothing except a cross in that church, but the cross is created by light in a very impressive way. But the sensibilities of Tadao Ando to the circumstances where he's building can be seen very clearly here in this enormous intervention in the Benetton headquarters in Italy, in which he sunk completely the new building, not to interfere with the 17th century buildings that were originally in the site. Or in the case of this temple in a very small town in Japan from 1988, in which the temple is completely in wood, like traditional temples with the traditional technique of construction. And at the same time, all the services are on the concrete building you can see on the left. Tadao Ando has created some of the most amazing spaces, like this library in honor of a great author of Japan, in which he really succeeds to innovate, always using a very similar vocabulary, very strong personal vocabulary. Here, for instance, this is a museum in Kobe, where you can see this incredibly strong stairs. And this is a phase in the 90s in which he started to build in a very large scale. And many people thought that Tadao Ando, who started with very small houses, would fail with the large scale. But in fact, he has been doing amazing buildings in large scale, like this irrigation museum in Japan in 2001, one of the most monumental buildings you will ever visit if you have the opportunity to go, or even in the United States, in Texas. This is the new Modern Art Museum in Fort Worth from 2002, in which you can recognize the Tadao Ando, but also in a lighter mode, but also adapting to this large scale that now he is being invited to build so much in China and in Europe, etc. The architect is Toyo Ito. He got the prize in 2003 after his students received, because we'll talk about Sana afterwards, and he is one of the most influential architects of the generation that follows Isozaki. He started with this very much Japanese concrete strong houses in 1976. You can understand that this is the kind of architecture in which life had to be somehow hidden, because the whole neighborhoods, as I said, the plots are very small, and so to create some kind of privacy, he creates this house that was very influential in the 70s. But very soon he starts to expand with lots of experimentation. He's a very open man. He's totally open to variety, and he's also a teacher, so he listens very much to the student. This is a museum in 1991. This is a gallery from the same year in which you can see he's playing with elements that give lots of strength to lightness. This is the Sendai Mediatek, maybe his most famous building when he built it in 2000, with a very original structure that you can see through. That, by the way, has resisted brilliantly to the major earthquake that happened a few years after it was completed. It's a space, it's an amazingly transparent building, an amazingly nice building. But you see the enormous difference with this library in art school near Tokyo from 2007, in which the elegance of the curves, the elegance of the whole building, because the transparency, even the light, the design of the light fixtures is by him, and you can see the building has the structure again, like a Sendai Mediatek, the structure is everything, the transparency in the case of this library also. And in 2004, his very famous Todd's building in Omotesando in Tokyo, in which the whole structure of the building is outside like a tree holding, and inside you have no necessity of any pillar or any other structure. In the following year, the Mikimoto building, also in Tokyo, in a completely different mode, and very objectively practical buildings like this stadium in Taiwan, in which people are protected when they go to the stadium, which is something that very few people had thought of before, and at the same time extremely elegant and open to the city and not an enclosed thing like most stadiums are. Or this new library in Taiwan at the university in 2013, in which I think everybody will study better going to a place like that. And finally, the very recent museum of Baroque in Puebla in Mexico, in which he plays as if the wind was moving the building. Shigeru got the prize in 2014. Shigeru is a very complex architect because he goes in so many directions that it is very difficult to follow his brilliant mind. This is one of his early work in the 90s, and that was very much published. It's called Furniture House. Why? Because the structure is the furniture inside. The bookcases, the cupboards, everything is what holds the ceiling. So it's very simple to construct, and he's always into experimental and to diversity of solutions, diversity of materials. He wants to experiment with all that. At the same time, he can be very poetic, as this house of 2 years later, of 95, the curtain wall house in Tokyo, which is a joke about the idea of a curtain wall. This house shows, again, in a very small plot, how you can give life to a very small house in a very crowded neighborhood of Japan. But little by little, he became more famous because of his interventions where major disasters occur. This is a cardboard paper, it's a really cardboard church in Kobe after the earthquake, 1995. And then from that moment on, the Kobe earthquake was very, very impressed very much all this generation of Japanese architects. And he started to develop different buildings with different materials for disasters. But he also had prestige buildings, like in this case, the Japanese pavilion in the Hanover Expo in the year 2000, in which he used bamboo structure. And he's also a master in using unexpected materials in unexpected circumstances. In this case, you can see this is a house for a photographer. He uses to close the windows. In fact, these are like garage doors with glass in parts of it. And so when the weather is good, the garage doors go up and the house is completely open. This is also what he applied in 2007, the Swatch building in Tokyo, in which garage doors with glass open every 4 floors. So when the weather is good in Tokyo, the whole building is open. So, and when the weather is bad, then the garage door closes with glass. This building is so original, we could have a whole presentation just about the Swatch building. He can also be aesthetically very exciting, like in the case of this club in South Korea in 2010. But what really interests him is to have buildings that have at the same time personality, but allow him to experiment. This is a museum in the north of France, the Pompidou Museum of Metz, which has some of the most fantastic rooms for exhibition. And as a common space, he has like this Japanese hat to protect people. But his great passion is really disaster relief work. This are some of the examples with cardboard. He adapts, depending on the country. On the right is Nepal. He adapts to the materials that are available there where disaster happens. So it's wood in Japan, or on the Philippines, as you can see, you have bamboo. And on the right, a recent temporary shelter in Japan, in which he uses industrial materials, but it's exactly because they are the easiest and the cheapest you can find in Japan. And his prestige buildings continue to appear a bit everywhere in the world. This is a concert hall in Paris, the Scène Musicale. And this glass that you see, in fact, has a system that rotates to take the natural light, and it's solar panels that rotate according to the light to make sure that the building uses solar light for most of its activities. Sana'a is in fact three offices of architecture at the same time, because the Sejima and Nishizawa got the prize together in 2010, and they work individually, or as Sejima or as Nishizawa, and together as Sana'a. This is the building that made them very famous, which is the 20th Century Contemporary Art Museum in Kanazawa. As you can see, what is fantastic in this project of 2004 is that they show very clearly what is the circulation area in the museum and what are the completely different rooms, exhibition rooms in the building that are extremely original. And so you are walking around and you feel as if you were entering other buildings, but in fact you have a sense of continuity. This is the finished building. As you can see, a very, very light ceiling, and this is one of the great characteristics of Sana'a and of them individually, is that sometimes you don't understand how this structure is holding, because they are extremely light buildings. This is for you to have an idea how you can feel the common areas, the open patios, and also the exhibition rooms, and how you can circulate in a space like that. This is also Kanazawa. But the prestige and the great success of this museum led them to participate and win the competition for the new Louvre Museum in Lens in the north of France in 2012. And again, what you see in Lens, what they do is that at the end of the day, it's not the building that matters. It's a non-personality architecture. They want the building to give much more attention to its content and to the life that is inside. Or the architecture is not as important as the life inside of the building. This is a very recent building they built in the United States. It's a community center. Again, this flow of space that you can go from one place to the other. And by the way, I'm very happy because they both told me that this was very much influenced by Brazilian architect Oscar Niemeyer, which I'm going to show you, talk about in a few minutes. So individually, Sejima, who is a woman, the extraordinary woman architect, probably the most famous today in the world, also has her own projects, like this apartment in Tokyo in 2011, in which, as I tell you, it's the transparency, the lightness, and the fact of what is happening inside the building that is the truth of the building, not so much the structure. This is a structure that she built in a small island in Japan that is almost depopulated, and they are stimulating a new life those islands. This is in Ujima, and this is a space that is completely interpreted by different artists. This, by the way, is a Brazilian artist that made this intervention this year. And this very surprising and beautiful apartment building in Kyoto, in which you have a very original way of having light and patios and the movement of this inside the apartments is really a very, very exciting one. And finally, her most recent, the Sumida Hokusai Museum, which is a museum in Tokyo for the great printmaker. You cannot have too much light because it's all about prints. So she did a very sculptural, gave a very sculptural answer. Nikuzawa, who co-founded Sanaa with her in '95, as you can see in the middle of the confusion of a city in Japan, you can see that he deconstructed the house. The house, this is 2005, is a bit like the museum, but the common spaces are completely open. So you go from one space to the other. You know that families live together in Japan. So this kind of experimentation, that worked extremely well. And his masterpiece is certainly the Teshima Art Museum in another island close to the island where Sejima did that pavilion in 2015. This is an art museum for only one work of art. It's a work of art done with water. This is almost a religious space. People enter this building and never forget. And this is another museum by Nishizawa, Hiroshi Museum near Tokyo, 2011, in which he plays even with how you walk, because it's not that the photograph is distorted, is that really the floor goes up and down as a ramp as you go through the museum and discover the patches, etc. So now, coming out of Japan, I go to my country, to Brazil, and go to Oscar Niemeyer. Oscar Niemeyer was an incredibly prolific architect. As you can see, he was born in 1907, so he died 104-year-old, and he got the Pritzker Prize quite early in 1988. Oscar Niemeyer is of a generation in Brazil that was very much influenced by this, because he worked in this building when he was in his 20s. In fact, this is the first tall glass building in the world. It's the Ministry of Education and Health in Rio in 1936. He was in the group that worked in this building. Le Corbusier was a consultant, but the lead architect was Lúcio Costa. But he showed he was brilliant at that moment. So he was called to do this in 1942 in Belo Horizonte, in the center of Brazil, a new urbanization. These buildings being built during the war, during the Second World War, when the war ended and in the world people discovered that in Brazil we were building amazingly joyful buildings. Niemeyer became an international sensation already in the 1940s. As you can see, this is obviously the building which Sejima and Nishizawa were referring when they talk about their work. In the same year and in the same location, he also did a church that doesn't look like a church, but at the same time has a very strong relation to the past because it uses the Portuguese styles. That is a very traditional decorative part of Baroque architecture from Portuguese colonization in Brazil, but he uses it in a very bold way with a very strong structure and already showing that his marks would be curves and originality. This is his own house in 1953, in which he incorporated the stone, he incorporated the vegetation, and always with curves, always with this very joyful side that Rio de Janeiro, the city where he was from, is very much related to the beach, to the mountain, to the forest. And so this is somehow, he is the Rio school from Rio de Janeiro. The Rio school of Brazilian architecture is a school that does an architecture of joy, we can say. But he is also a designer of landmarks. This is the presidential in Brasilia, new cap from 1957. And he created icons like these columns that little by little became very popular buildings. He's also a master in promenade architecturale. Promenade architecturale is what Le Corbusier said, that when you were walking inside a building, you must have different sensations. This is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Brasilia with this amazing staircase that takes heads of state to the main dining room. Also, as I say, that he is a designer of landmarks and icons. This is the Cathedral of Brasilia from 1958. These images became there was international fascination. You have everything there. You have sculpture, but you have structure, you have architecture, you have originality, and you have a different approach to what the church is. Something about the National Congress of also 1958, it had to be the symbol of the city. The strength of Niemeyer are that he operates in 3 layers. The first layer is the first impact. Any child can draw the building. So it's a building that appeals to even a person that is going around in a bus. The second layer is when you look as an architect and as an expert or a lover of architecture, you see that this is a very sophisticated and original architecture. And the third layer is when you enter the buildings. The buildings of Niemeyer, you saw the staircase in the other. This layer of the promenade, of the walking inside the building, is always a very pleasant surprise. So he's operating at many levels, and he wants to have completely different publics. This is his one of the most recent buildings he did in 2006. And this is the most original way to go from one floor to another floor in a museum. And it's a spectacular structure. In that walk, you can see all of Brasilia and come back to the second floor of the museum. A bit the same sensation of the promenade, of the walk, is the entrance. You can see the curves to enter the Museum of Contemporary Art in Niterói in '96, in which you have this curved ramp, and then when you enter the museum, sometimes you can't see the works of art because you're tempted to look at the view, which is amazing. Finally, Paulo Mendes da Rocha, who was the 2006 Pritzker Prize, still very active. Paulo Mendes became famous by this building, which is a small stadium in a club in São Paulo, but which had a very original way of having it and having ventilation and a very bold concrete structure. But most of his career, he built very impressive houses in the 1960s. This is his own house in 1964. He's a brutalist, and at the same time, he loves lightness, as you can see. He is the symbol of the São Paulo school. São Paulo is the largest city in Brazil, much more urban context than Rio de Janeiro, that is on the beach and the mountains, etc. São Paulo is very much more a real city. And on top of it, he became an important architect at the moment that there was political it was a period of military government in Brazil, so it was a generation that was very much reacting to what was happening, while Niemeyer started with very much with democracy and all that. So the architecture of São Paulo school is much more an architecture of conversion, an architecture of brutalism, work very well with it, joyful as the real one. He, in spite of that, as you see, he also incorporated vegetation because the climate is very similar with many houses. This is 1964. He has very original way of enclosing people inside the house. It's a very symbolic thing, but also when it's raining, you are inside the house, and inside the house is a very special experiment. Then this non-transparency, non-integration, but at the same time sculptural quality, like this house in the late 70s. But what protected him internationally were his interventions in old buildings. This is an old painting museum in São Paulo that was abandoned in the middle of the way in the late 19th century. And he rebuilt it using all the basic things that were there to do a fantastic new building. This is a recent gallery. As you can see, the entrance very original, the way the light comes in. He's a very, he's an architect of no compromise. He's a modernist, he's tough, he's a brutalist, but at the same time, when he goes into restoring old buildings like this church, he comes with a very original structure that allows all the old walls of the church not to be used and to create a particularly unique structure. This is a recent museum he did in Lisbon, the National Coach Museum, in which he tried to integrate also this very strong architecture with the traditional old city. And finally, in his hometown where he was born, a gigantic cultural center in Vitória do Espírito Santo, 2017, in which all this coherence and all this no compromise attitude of his continued to be very clear in an architect in which sometimes it's difficult to know in which year he did the building, because there is such a continuity in his logic that it's one of the strongest architectures you can find. So this is the second Brazilian to get the Pritzker, and I've talked a lot. I hope you have enjoyed this presentation and seen how different good architecture can. I think this is the message of the Pritzker Prize, is that everybody that gets the Pritzker Prize is an amazing architect with a very complete work, because the Pritzker Prize is for the complete work of an architect and not for an individual building. So it wants to show diversity is very possible if quality is the center. And I think that this is the message. Quality is the center.
Wonderful. We have muted all the participants, but I'm sure there is a round of applause from every end. Thank you, Mr. Corrêa and Lago, for this enthralling session. We did have some hiccups with our magician, the internet, but it was very kind of you to accommodate and repeat those parts with internet slangs. It was also a treat to view the monuments of modern, postmodern architecture, especially from your lens of analysis. This lecture focused on many forms that good architecture can take, and it was enlightening to see how you associated even the socio-political scenarios in these three countries as backdrops for their architecture. We were floored by your analysis of these buildings. So let me quote Doshi when he said that sometimes experience and even architecture is like the blind man and the elephant, each one experiencing from one's vantage. So the first question that I have for you is, with what vantage did you experience all these different architects and their marvels?
With what?
Vantage.
Point of view. I experienced those different architectures. Yeah. Look, I'm a lucky man, because by choosing to be a diplomat and a career diplomat, one of our main characteristics is to travel. So I travel a lot, and every time that I go to a meeting, I try to see the best possible buildings in the place where I'm having a meeting. So thanks to that, I could see personally many of those buildings. But we have to be very realistic. 99% of the buildings we will see in our lives will be through photographs. There is no doubt about it. Even if you travel like crazy, you are going to see through photographs. And so I think that although the architects obviously have to concentrate on the personal impact of knowing a building, and you all know that it's a completely different experience between the photograph and the reality. But the truth is that architecture has to have more and more this photographic impact. That is what I think has been criticized or analyzed extensively about this idea of star architect, or of structures that are just there to call the attention and not to the persons that are there. And so I think that the prize is also very careful in that sense. There is no Pritzker Prize that was given to an architect that is a flashy architect, but that doesn't have substance. The substance is the essential element. But on the other side, enjoying architecture through photographs, to movies, etc., is something that is a reality. Don't think that you need to have the personal experience. But in general, when a building is really good, when you have the personal experience, then you are even more amazed by that building. But that doesn't mean that seeing the photographs and seeing the plans and analyzing it, you will not be able to already appreciate enormously.
Right, thank you. So in this lecture, you also focused on good architecture. However, do you think good architecture is rare? What will you say about the mainstream architecture, which kind of predominates the Indian cities?
Well, I think that good architecture is sometimes difficult to define, because you have some architects that are very good, but obviously their work varies. There are some buildings that are more successful, some buildings are badly built, some buildings didn't follow the project. So it's not that you can say that all of these architects have only good or wonderful projects. Some projects are less successful, some projects face challenges that were unexpected, etc. So you have this first difficulty even among good architects, which is sometimes their work varies. There are some, Oscar Niemeyer, for instance, built, I think, 600 important buildings. So obviously of these 600 buildings, some buildings are less good than others. But the fact is that he has a number of masterpieces and wonderful architecture that is enough for many, would be enough for many architects. The other thing is the common architecture, as you say, which I tend to call as construction. There is a difference between architecture and construction. And one thing is what can be built, and that is what is fascinating in the incremental architecture of Doshi, is that when the architecture can contribute to the society without needing to be a perfectly executed building by a star architect. So I think this is very, very important. Architecture is when the intention and the main elements are in. So sometimes people are a bit perplexed because they see an office building in a big town, beautifully built, but the architecture is very bad. And then they go to a country like Brazil or to India, and they see a building that has no maintenance, that was not very well built, but it's amazing architecture. So I think this is a very interesting exercise, but let me be very straightforward. Most architecture is very bad, everywhere in the world, everywhere in the world. And for all the students of architecture, the reality is the following, is that architecture is not a job. Architecture is definitely an art, something that has to have more than simply the technical dimension. So one has always to try to go ahead to change what they're doing and to include other elements and to continue to learn, because experience is something that you have seen, by the way, in the history of architecture. The great majority of architects reach their prime relatively late. There are some exceptions, but they reach their prime when they have more experience. And so don't give up, because when you have an early career and you're not doing what you want to do, etc., etc., be sure that most of these architects suffered this very much. What is exceptional in Japan is that since the country had been destroyed and the economy was rebuilt quite quickly, there were lots of things to be built. But the other surprising thing in Japan is the average life of a building in Tokyo is less than 30 years. So many of these buildings have been destroyed for another building, but this at the same time gives enormous opportunity to architecture. So Japan had this fact that has allowed Japan to have more Pritzker Prize winners than any other country, even the United States.
You've been the ambassador to India, Japan, and are from Brazil. Can you tell us about the building that you personally have loved or have enjoyed being in the most in any of those countries? It need not be from a Pritzker Laureates, or it could be from one of the buildings that you've actually presented today.
Yeah. Look, I will tell you that there are some buildings that I will quote that the experience of visiting has improved enormously your perception of the quality of the building. I have to say that the Institute of Management in Bangalore of Doshi, I had seen photographs, but until I saw the building personally and how it worked and how the students were living and working in that building, I think it's one of the most successful projects I've ever seen in my life, as simple as that. The other thing I can tell you is that an Oscar Niemeyer building, when you walk around all these curves, you enter those buildings, you go through the stairs, this promenade architecturale that Le Corbusier loved to say is a unique experience to have in Oscar Niemeyer's building. Then I can tell you the tower, for instance, of Isozaki, that is the last image of Isozaki I showed in Milan. You will say one more tall tower, one more building that calls the attention, etc. But when you arrive at this tower has a power that you can never imagine through the photograph. The quality also of the presence of this tower. So I think that what I'm never tired of is that when a building is really good, the experience of going personally really is striking. And everybody knows that by going to Taj Mahal or to going to a cathedral in Europe, that are buildings that when you enter, you have a kind of feeling that photographs or descriptions could hardly match. So I'm a constant optimist because every week I have a good architectural experience, and I'm very glad, and it makes me very happy most of the time.
It's very nice to know. In fact, we have a very personal question that we have from one of the participating colleges. It's broken into multiple sections. So there is a serious part to it, and there is a fun jest to it as well. So they want to know if you can share your experience as a Pritzker jury member. What are some aspects that you focus on as a jury member? Could you share a little bit about the evaluation process? And we also want to know if you've ever broken the news to a laureate. How did they react when you did that?
No, I can tell you the following. One of the characteristics of the jury of the Pritzker Prize is complete secrecy. Nobody can talk about the process. Nobody can talk how the meetings are. But I'm going to tell you something that many people don't know, is that anyone can send a dossier and can send documentation about any architect that they believe should be considered. So if you are convinced that there is, I don't know, someone, whatever, in Nepal that should be taken into consideration, anyone can send a dossier to the central office of the Pritzker Prize. So it's a very open process in the beginning because we consider everything that is being said. But then the entire process, we are all committed to extreme secrecy. And by the way, you will notice that no former jury member ever gave an interview or whatever on one of the process. So I'm very sorry to frustrate you.
But did you ever get the chance to actually break the news to a laureate?
To
a laureate, to a winner? Did you ever get the chance to break the news to a winner?
No, because the announcement is a very formal announcement. And we know the date, and we cannot say anything until that date. And so, no, I never announce anything. I can't even tell my family anything. So it's a very, very complex situation with friends and family, because they're all very frustrated that you don't trust us, But that's not the point, is that we all have to do that effort.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot. There are a few colleges who would want to personally interact with you and ask their questions. We have a question from Amity Lucknow. I will unmute them now so that they can ask the questions. Amity Lucknow? Amity Lucknow, you've been unmuted. Okay, there seems to be a technological slack there. So their question is, do you think that buildings of postmodern period are killing the existence of vernacular architecture?
If they do what to vernacular?
Amity Lucknow would want to understand if you think that modern and postmodern architecture is taking over the existence of vernacular and local architecture.
That is a very, very interesting, it's a very interesting question. Vernacular architecture, vernacular construction is probably one of the strongest cultural elements of any country. So it is a very precious thing. But vernacular architecture has been mostly destroyed by the notion of comfort. You see, it's a very interesting thing when you go to Japan. Today, there is no old town in Japan that looks like what we see in the movies. There is not. Because they are wooden house, very uncomfortable, cold in the winter, hot in the summer. Now you have substituted the materials, etc., etc. So I think that is the comforts of everyday life that have affected more vernacular architecture. On the other side, but it's a very interesting question because modernism, yes, modernism wanted to be overwhelming and wanted somehow to destroy the old way of living and to really substitute cities. You remember that in 1922, Le Corbusier had the Plan Voisin, in which he destroyed 1/4 of Paris to build tall buildings inside. So the origin of modernism was very much anti-traditional construction. But we have to remember that it was also linked to the fact that the old 19th century city was considered a very unhealthy place with lots of sickness, with dirt, etc., etc. So they wanted to give a new life to people. So the destruction of the old architecture was part of it. So in the origin, I think in the 20s there was that. But then little by little, there was an adaptation, and postmodernism was very important in revealing that classical and vernacular architecture could be integrated to good architecture. Obviously, there are lots of bad postmodern buildings. By the way, probably most of the postmodern buildings are absolutely horrible. But they are theoretically extremely important, and they were historically very important because they brought back attention to study some things that had been forgotten. But I believe that the next step that we are living now, and is very strong in Brazil, and I think in India also, is to try to transform these old neighborhoods and these old houses that are unhealthy, that are uncomfortable, etc., etc., into something that is livable and at the same time maintains the main characteristics that people want their neighborhood to have. So the tabula rasa urbanism, the one that you just come, you destroy everything and you build apartment buildings instead. Fortunately, we have come over with that. We have to adapt and transform slums and what we call favelas in Brazil into neighborhoods. They have to be transformed into neighborhoods, and people have to listen to the people that are going to live in these houses. Because I don't think that today architects want to change people and change the world. No, they want to make the world better. And to make the world better, you have to listen to the people that are going to use this architecture.
We love how your answers actually respond to every aspect of the question, even those which have not been explicitly noted in there. The next question comes from Prime College of Architecture. Professor Pritzker Rajan, would you want to ask your question directly?
You can go ahead. You can ask.
I can't hear.
Yes, sir, please do.
Louder, please.
How do you react to the statement that architecture is to celebrate life?
How do you do that?
So his question is that how do you react to this phrase that says that architecture is built to celebrate life?
I tend to completely agree because obviously I'm suspicious because I love architecture, but I think that architecture is the strongest thing that remains of any civilization. And the way people live is the biggest symbol of past civilizations. So I think that architecture has to reflect not only the culture and the habits of the country, but also the stage in which the society is, how the hierarchy of what is a cultural building or a working building or a living building or an amusement center. All these different things that make life. You can analyze a civilization through its architecture. So I hope architecture will concentrate, as this sentence says, to the most important things in life.
Very well. Colleges, if you have any more questions, please raise your hand. These are the last 5 minutes. If we see the digital hand raised against your names, we will for sure ask your question. We have a question from Mysore School of Architecture. I'm unmuting you. Professor Sandeep, please ask your question. Professor Sandeep?
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Sandeep is not here today. It's Priyanka. The question is that you've shown evolution of different types of architecture through your presentation. So we were trying to know what is lacking in today's society in terms of architecture, like how architecture can probably bring in a difference in today's society.
What is lacking in the society? You mean what is needed still for a society to value more architecture? Yes?
Yes.
That's a bit that?
Yes.
Yes. I think, unfortunately, a lot. Because architecture is dominated by the process of construction. So construction companies have to have a good relationship with the architects, or in general, everywhere in the world, construction companies love to say that architects are complicated and you have to avoid architects and you have just to build something that is going to stand there. This difficulty is very, very real a bit everywhere. But in a developing country like Brazil or like India, I think that the state has a very important function, which is to stimulate good architecture. The state, the central state, but also the local authorities, no? I think they have the obligation to stimulate good architecture because they have to show I think that good architecture shows respect for the population, shows respect for the voters. Because you are spending the money of the government and most people are only looking at the cost of the building. But I think this was very bad for architecture. This is something that is like a conspiracy of construction companies, you know, to only concentrate on the costs. Because a building that is well built, even if it costs a little more, it can bring to society enormous advantages that are very difficult to evaluate in the project moment. So I believe that if the state and the local governments have a commitment to good architecture, a commitment to listen to what people want in their community, and really try to find the appropriate architect to do what is needed, then we will succeed to change this relation. Obviously, in very rich countries like the Northern European countries, this is very true. It is very true also in Spain. It is very true in a few other developed countries. But it's not necessarily automatic that it comes with the money. It doesn't come with the fact that the country is rich. There are many rich countries that have absolutely that don't stimulate at all good architecture. But you have many examples, and I think that for Brazil and for India, this is very good, is to see how we can demonstrate how a good project has changed the life of a community. And this is very true in Japan. Most of the community centers are by construction companies, very bad ones. But then you enter a community center by Sejima, for instance. I didn't even show a photograph of it, but I went to visit it. And you see how the people react to the fact that they have a building that was really thought in a very appropriate way to what was their needs. But we're still a long way.
Thank you. We have the next question from Amity Jaipur. We're unmuting you, Amity Jaipur. Please ask your question.
I think it's Lucknow.
Amity Jaipur?
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible, sir.
First of all, thank you for this wonderful presentation, and we thank ASESH and Lago. We would like to know, sir, earlier mentioned that quality is the most important component to judge any architecture. How do you define quality in architecture? Or how Pritzker looks into quality for architecture? If he can elaborate on that?
How to qualify? How to define?
So the question is that how do you define the quality of architecture?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that it's a question of standards. I believe that this is a complex definition. I'll try to define it, but I think it's easily understandable, although it's difficult to define. The quality architecture is an architecture first that is honest. It's not a copy of something that the person has seen. It is a project that was developed specifically for the site, quality in the sense of taking into consideration the exposure to the light, the materials that you have in the area, what really the program was asking in this project. All these elements is a question, I think, very much of respect towards the client and towards those who are going to use the architecture. Then the aesthetic dimension of the architecture can have an enormous variation. As you could see, if you make a competition between Toyo Ito and Fumiko Maki and Isosaki, they will present completely different architectures, but they will all present quality projects, taking into consideration all the elements of the program and probably also of the budget, because they are very serious architects. Now, so quality architecture is about honesty of the project. The standard of quality of the structure or the construction, etc., are also absolutely important. But the project itself, the quality of the project, then you can have problems, difficulties, and you have to strengthen columns or eliminate a part because the budget doesn't fit, and all these things are obviously taken into consideration. But quality is the honesty of the original project, the honesty with which you're dealing with the challenges of the project. And I think you can define that as quality.
Yes, so with this, we have the last question from Stanford University in Bangladesh. Professor Shabir, I'm unmuting you.
Hello. Are you listening?
I can hear you.
Hello.
Hi.
Yes, Professor Shabir, we can hear you.
Hello. We have a question from one of our students. So, are you listening?
Yes, we do hear you.
Hello. So, our question is, it is also important to watch the museum from inside also. But most of the cases in the examples and the presentation, we have shown the exterior of the building. So the question from our student is there any specific reason to watch the building from outside rather than the total interior area? As a museum, it's very important to control light from the interior. Also, a combination of interior and exterior light.
So he asked that when you discussed the museum, you actually showed them visuals, exterior visuals, but the building also has nuances and play of light that could be experienced. So was there any specific reason why you focused on the exterior more than the interior?
Of which museum? Of any specific?
Stanford?
Sorry, I think we couldn't explain you correctly. The thing is, most of the examples from the presentation, we have only specific examples or no, most of the cases. I mentioned most of the cases, most of the examples, it was shown that the exterior of the building. So one of the students is wants to know that is it not important to watch the building from inside? Sorry for the reverberation.
I think I understand your question. Why do I focus much more on photographs of the exterior than on photographs of interiors of the buildings in general?
Right.
Yeah. Well, there is a very strong reason to that. Is that the exterior of the building is what has a dialogue with the city. So you can have the most amazingly wonderful house or hospital or office building inside that serves the persons that have ordered this building or are using this building. But if its relation to the city is bad, this is not what should have been built. So the exterior of the building is what affects all of us. Many architects during a certain period did the very big mistake of being obsessive about the plan, about the circulation and how the building worked, and thought that the facade was not so important. The facade is the relation to everybody that is not involved with the building, but has to look at the building every day, going to school, going to his office, or going for a walk in the park. He has to look at that building. And so I think that architects have to have an enormous respect for the public. They are not paying for the building, they're not going to use the building, but they are using the space of the city. So that is why I insist very much on the facade, because almost all of the buildings that we know in our cities, we only know the facade. And because of security issues and all these things, more and more we cannot enter in other buildings. We cannot enter in private houses, etc. We can only enter in public buildings. So I think we switched. Am I still speaking? Are you still listening to me?
Yes, of course we're listening.
Yeah, okay. So that's why I think that architects can never forget that their building belongs to a city, belongs to a and is going to be appreciated or detested or hated or whatever by the people who live in that city. So a brilliant project that does not respect the place where it is, I think, not an adequate building, even if it's a very good project, but if it's in the wrong place and if it doesn't take into consideration the everyday life of people that live in that city.
Thank you, Mr. Corrêa, Lago. For the benefit of all the students, participants who are listening in, we will be uploading a recording of this in our dashboard. Specifically for all the students, please share an A4 on what you learned from this session. It could, the medium, the mode of communication is all yours. You could upload it in the discussion board in the course browser. We'll share more details of this with your faculty soon. And after you do, this is of course, we will be sharing it with Mr. André as well, but this is what you extract from this lecture is also something that we would be very happy and excited to learn about. You will receive a certificate of participation after you share in your share in the assignment with us. With this, we come to the conclusion of our session. But a very important part of this, which is our vote of thanks and our thank yous to all of you, remains. I hand over to Geeta to take it forth.
Thank you, Sonam. So what a visual treat that was, André. So we come to an end of an enlightening session by Mr. Corrêa do Lago. You've ignited our curiosity and passed on your compassion to a new India. ASEG is lucky to have well-wishers like you who believe in our cause and support us. We are happy to share with the colleges that we've launched AceGate, a platform to practice gate papers online. We're also releasing this winter from 15th December to 31st December conferences on post-graduation, opportunities to give you a glimpse about life overseas from alumni of renowned institutions. We have studios in the relevance and production of parametrics and a studio engagement with Hunarshala. Do check out our website and follow us on Facebook and Instagram for more updates. I take this opportunity to thank the following colleges for broadcasting this at their auditoriums and collaborating with us. I hope I'm not missing any college. Midas from Tamil Nadu, Prime from Nagapatnam, CIET from Coimbatore, SCMS from Kochi, Dayanand Sagar from Bangalore, Mysore School of Architecture, Bagulamukhi from Bhopal, ITM, Pearl Academy from Delhi, MNIT Jaipur, Amity Jaipur, Sharda University Noida, Amity Lucknow, IIT Roorkee, City School of Architecture Sri Lanka, Andhra University Vizag, Stanford, Bangladesh. That's quite a spread, André, that you attracted for us, and I think it's been such an amazing morning of learning for me, and I'm sure for all these young students who signed in. And I believe we should do more of this. I'm already excited about the next one that we could request you to do, and I hope you'll be willing enough to do one more session at least for us. I thank you for making this morning for us, and I thank everyone. Have a good day and cheers for the joy of learning.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience. Bye-bye.
You can click on leave meeting option and leave the meeting. Sharda University, I'm sorry, I see a raised hand. Due to paucity of time, we couldn't take your question.
Okay.
I hope you enjoyed the session. I know there were technical glitches, but for sure in the recording, we'll ensure that those have been cropped up.
Sure. Thank you.
प्लीज करना आज लॉग आउट करना है ना
Thank you, Professor Parasita Rajan. The meeting by clicking on leave meeting option at the bottom of the screen. Professor Anjani Kumar Shukla, thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Sharma, which college?
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Andhra University. Thank you, Prime College.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, MNIT Jaipur. MIT Jaipur, thank you.